I always love to talk to product people, especially because it's such a cool intersection of the creative and kind of the more technical and practical. So I would love to start with your A to Z process of making products come to life. So whether you want to ground that in an example of something you've already worked on or just a general thought process that you have when you're approaching product, would love to start there.
Yeah, absolutely. I would love to talk a little bit about kind of my mentality around product because I feel like it comes from kind of a very unique place where I always kind of wanted to do the creative stuff, but I'm such an engineer and like technical person at heart where like I'm like I have to figure out how everything works and then go from there, right? So the biggest thing that I've really learned as a product manager is to never ideate in a vacuum. I really like that concept because like my job as a product manager is to own the product like responsibility. So I have to ensure that products add value to our customers, that they're fully thought out, brainstormed with a cross-functional team, prototyped, created, and released. So it's kind of like you are responsible for this product from like cradle to reality, right? Typically, I like to bring in stakeholders as early as possible into the conversation. So I put an immense amount of focus on like user interviews, developing user roadmaps, journeys, something in the product world we call like user personas as well. And that typically consists of like learning about pain points, really like trying to empathize with users and the people who are going to touch your product one day to make sure that we build the right thing that's actually going to add value to their lives or maybe like take away a pain from their lives. And so I'll often work with engineers and include them in those conversations as early as possible. My role at Shelf Engine is really like within the tech teams. We call it actually like the product team. So I have like data scientists and engineers on my team. And it's really cool that like we're actually part of the same team and we work really closely together. And for me, I think it's really helpful to have everyone have like a clear picture of who's going to be impacted by features early on. So I think in some organizations, a lot of times like product managers will talk to the business people, really understand the bigger picture, and then share only bite-sized reasoning for why we're building certain things. But I think it's really important for engineers and the people actually building the products to like understand everything, like why is this so important and like why is this going to impact someone so much. And so like once I kind of have that initial phase of conversations, I'll like really synthesize what I'm hearing. I'll bring in data where appropriate. And in my company, like data really drives almost everything. And I'll think about like scaling. So especially at like a growth stage company like Shelf Engine, we're Series B, we're really like, I would describe it as like a hyper growth stage because it's just like crazy all the time in the best way. You really need to be thinking about like what you can create that will either be A, long lasting, or B is going to help you get to the next growth stage. And so the longer term that you can think, the better the product, in my opinion. And it's really like my job as a PM to provide like the vision, the strategy around products, and help our builder teams, meaning like the engineers, the data scientists, and like the ops team really, who are the users, understand how these changes, these features, these products, like from small to big, are going to impact that bottom line. And we should think about like certain things like data structure, UX, UI, stuff like that as it pertains to the building. And then I'll kind of end with the fact that I think iteration is super important. You're never going to get it right the first time. And if you think you are, you're building it wrong. And so I really like love to build relationships with people both on the tech teams and the non-tech teams, because then I can actually create this really clear channel where we already built the trust and we can iterate together. And it's not like, hey, this idea was bad, or hey, this is the idea we're going with. It's like really a repetitive iterative process together to get to like the ideal product.
It sounds like you have a really cool framework, a thought process when it comes to approaching product. I was going to ask you, what is your brainstorming process? But do you feel like at this point you have a framework that requires you to think very little and it's more of like, I need to see the data on this? Or do you actually find there are a lot of moments where you need to take a step back and brainstorm? Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely makes sense. It depends on the product, I would say, or the project that I'm working. I think I actually spend a lot of time. I spent a lot of time when I first started at the company, really like listening before jumping in, because that was really important to me coming into an organization where the business is really complex and there's like a lot of moving pieces. And the more I understand as a product manager, the more I can contribute, right? And so whenever I'm taking on kind of a new endeavor, whether it's like a full-fledged product or maybe it's an improvement or a small feature that's going to, take 5 hours off of someone's plate, like those types of things, I think require a level of brainstorming that should take data into account, and it does, but you also have to think about like the human implications. And I think a lot of that has to do with like really taking a step back and brainstorming and saying, is this going to help someone for a month? Is it going to help them for a year? Is it going to help the next person that they train on this? I would say it's like definitely a balance, but I do spend a lot more time doing kind of that brainstorming and then pulling in the data when and where needed.